Rudy's Revelation.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode, October 23rd, 2024. So today, in the news, a political landscape that has admittedly changed in a monumentous realignment. And what to say about poll numbers. All this and more headlines coming up right now. First headline up today. Trump accuses UK party of election meddling despite links to its rivals. Donald Trump's campaign said Britain's governing Labour Party had engaged in a blatant foreign interference. Other British politicians have previously acted in support for Trump. What the New York Times is failing to admit, that I'm going to get to in just a second, is that the Labour Party sent 100 officials over to the U.S. to aid in getting Kamala Harris elected. So that is indeed, by its very nature, election meddling by a foreign government or a foreign political party. Over to the BBC, Trump's team accuses Labour of election interference as Starmer tries to play down the row. And if in British parlance, row is another word for argument or disagreement. So we'll just go to the BBC summary. Donald Trump's team accuses the UK's Labour Party of election interference as it sends volunteers to campaign for Kamala Harris in the U.S. election. Well, there it is. Did it or did it not send 100 volunteers? Now, how does a Labour Party send somebody who's volunteering? So the volunteers aren't getting paid, but they're still sent by a foreign political party. The Trump campaign complains to the Federal Election Commission and says the illegal foreign assistance is another feeble attempt in the long line of anti-American election interference. The dispute began with a LinkedIn post from the Labor's head of operations asking for people to travel to the U.S., saying nearly 100 were already going. Prime Minister Keir Starmer tries to downplay the row, telling the BBC Labour has long sent volunteers to U.S. elections. Also, this is a practice that's been going on for some time. That's interesting to know. And then they go on to say the analysis is this won't make Trump-Starmer relations any easier. And with less than 2 weeks to go, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris remain very close in the election polls, according to skewed polling. Now, we know something about polling has been going on, and Perry and I discussed this last night in the latest episode of Tuesdays with Perry, episode 95. Check it out. We went live yesterday at 9 p.m., as we do every Tuesday. So check out episode 95 of Tuesdays with Perry. I also want to take this time to ask you to engage the channel, like, subscribe, give me a thumbs up, share the podcast, and leave a comment if you so desire. I wanted to make a couple notes here really quickly that Monday's episode, there was something wrong with the videos I played. We had a little sticking. So if you want to see those segments from CBS Sunday Morning and CBS Face the Nation, they're up on my YouTube channel. So check out Rudy's Revelation on YouTube as well. All right, moving on with the news. Big news here. Former Democratic Representative Tulsi Gabbard reveals she joined the Republican Party at Trump rally. And she said she's proud, certainly should be proud, to stand here with you today, referencing Trump, but also with the MAGA crowd. Now, this is going to set up for most of what I'm going to talk about today, which is a political realignment. And when I talk about the Republican Party, I often talk about the new Republican Party, which is part of the political realignment, which is that the political realignment, which is demonstrated by this headline that Tulsi Gabbard, who is a Democrat, representative from Hawaii, joined the Republican Party. It's a long line of people who are switched parties have gone over to the Republican Party. The new Republican Party is part of the political realignment, which is the anti-corporatists, middle class, blue collar working, and you see it in the unions as well, are moving over to support a constitutionally based Republican Party, which is really grew out of the Tea Party, which is a more libertarian leaning Republican Party and less corporatist. So the Republican Party, part of MAGA, is shedding the corporatist mantle, which has been picked up by the Democrats. And now the Republican Party has become the party of the middle class and not the corporatist party. So this leads me to the next headline here in Newsweek. Donald Trump is benefiting from a huge political realignment along class lines in this opinion piece. Well, there is something to be said about this opinion piece. It's less along class lines. What I'm trying to explain here is that there is a liberty. See, there are people that are confused really about the left-right paradigm as it comes down to social issues. The social issues, for the most part, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, are really played out along the authoritarian axis. So if a political regime is telling you how to behave and whatnot, that is considered authoritarian. If the political regime or government at the time is allowing you to make your own decisions, that's considered libertarian. So people get confused when they say socially conservative and socially liberal. They're a little misguided in saying, what does the state say about your behavior? And that's what we want to keep in mind, is whether you have the right to do something and whether you should do it. That's a bigger discussion. So I want to go to the Wall Street Journal article here that says there's a secretive billionaire network funding Stop the Steal 2.0. GOP donors have given more than $140 million to nearly 50 groups working on election integrity. Another crusade of ours, they say. The reason this connects into what I'm saying is it's not, as Newsweek said, the political realignment is not along class lines per se. It is along libertarian lines. First of all, this secretive billionaire network funding Stop the Steal is really investing in election integrity. Like I often say, there's several things that are a threat to election integrity and really to democracy. This is mail-in or mail-out ballots, drop boxes, etc., and other electronic methods of voting. I don't have a problem with early voting. The ballot chain of custody is the issue. So we've been hearing some reports of people, you use an electronic tabulator to cast your ballot and then it spits out a paper ballot and people are checking the ballots and it's revealing the opposite of what they voted for. So, but what I'm saying is these are billionaires network funding Stop the Steal or pro-democracy efforts to maintain election integrity. So this is Trump platform. And so you can see the political realignment is not along class lines because this is a billionaire network. Just to show that Newsweek doesn't really know what they're talking about. Axios is reporting America's leftward shift. They say why it matters. While radical leftists have hardly conquered the business world, the research is a sign that the strong connection between the Republican Party and corporate America is loosening. Loosening? It's pretty much switched. It goes on to say white college-educated adults are increasingly identifying as Democrat, while those without degrees are moving right, as I went on to say. The realignment is reflected in Republicans' efforts to woo the labor vote and the movement of some rank-and-file union members to the GOP. Now, this is coming from Axios, which is a captured media, but they are reporting things that are correct here. But this, as I mentioned previously, had started way earlier with the Tea Party, where people that are more constitutionally minded are building a party for the middle class. Why? Is because the Constitution, particularly the Bill of Rights, is libertarian in nature. What it does is it outlines individual liberties that are endowed by a creator, supposedly, but are enshrined in the law of the land, which is the Bill of Rights. People have realized, uneducated, uncollege-educated people have realized, teaching themselves civics, that this is the basis for freedom, really around the world, but particularly here in America. So as important as democracy and election integrity is, liberties, Americans who treasure their freedoms, rights, whatever you want to call them, is overwhelming, even by newly arrived, minted immigrants, citizens, what have you. So that's why shipping in a lot of people doesn't always work. But unfortunately, the newly arrived, newly minted immigrants, citizens, what have you, are a little slow on the uptake on the propaganda. So they're buying into the propaganda because most of them are less educated, which is the problem. All right, moving on to the Democratic side, the Free Press is reporting, meet Kamala's mega donors. Michael Bloomberg, former New York City mayor and founder of Bloomberg News, Alex Soros, the son of George Soros, and James Murdoch, the Rupert Murdoch media empire son, are among the billionaires behind Kamala Harris's cash flow. What I want to move here to is this specific entry is James and Catherine Murdoch. The simple reason is media executive Rupert Murdoch has long been one of the most important Republican allied forces in the country. His son, James Murdoch, and his son's wife, Catherine Murdoch, see things differently. This is why, if you look at Fox News, now, he's not with Fox News anymore, but that's because he can't be democratically aligned and be involved in Fox News. But what we do know is that he is still influencing Fox News. And so that's why you see Fox News trying to play it more, I don't want to say fair, but like Brett Baer or Neil Cavuto, they lead their newscast with Kamala Harris sound bites and rallies. And why is that coming from a conservative network? I don't know. Let's see. So let's go back to this article. The couple has given close to $2 million to Future Forward and Harris Victory Fund that on the top of the Democratic aligned donations this election cycle, according to federal records. James Murdoch, the former CEO of 21st Century Fox, is on the board of Tesla. His wife, his and Catherine Murdoch's private foundation, Quadrivium, gives to environmental groups, left-wing groups such as Tides Foundation, and entities affiliated with a massive dark money network called Arabella Advisors. Oh. So now we see dark money network called Arabella Advisors, where that the money that he gives to that network is not disclosed. So, of course, that's my problem with that. Let's see where we're going to go now. Just the news. Now that Trump's ahead, media suddenly says the polls are all wrong. So what we have here in the subhead is pollsters famously underestimated Trump's support in 2016, leading to public shock at his election night victory over Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. When Harris was up, mainstream media touted the polls, not so much. As Perry predicted last night, the polls are going to tighten, which is indeed, but what we see is the mainstream media trying to skew the polls even more so with increasing their margin of error. So they just say margin of error. The poll might show Trump up by 3 or 4 points, but they include that in the margin of error, and then they just make it even, which is not the case. Wall Street News is reporting Wall Street pros get into position to profit from a Trump win. When polls show a tight race, some investors are putting in wagers that could pay off if Trump beats Harris. What I was just saying is that they're not hedging. They're betting on Trump. The bet makers, the bookmakers have Trump ahead by 10 points in some polls, in some betting polls. So Wall Street pros are getting into position to profit from a Trump win because they're doing that now. It's 2 weeks before the election, because once the election happens, even before inauguration, people are going to get into position to benefit from Trump's policies. At least Wall Street will. So Wall Street is about getting ahead of the game. So that's what they're doing. Is the earlier you get in line, the more your benefit. That's how Wall Street works. So they are indeed getting in line for Trump victory because, as I think I mentioned this last night on Tuesdays with Perry, the Trump base is 53% of the electorate. That's a winning margin already. So Trump has gained since 2016. He hasn't gone backwards. Now, there was a protest vote and a cheat in 2020 that made it look like Joe Biden won. Joe Biden he's the worst president ever, but he got the most votes. How does that happen? He wasn't that popular. And a majority of people that never vote all of a sudden voted in the middle of the pandemic. Strange. However, what we're looking at here is that Kamala Harris is a worse candidate than Joe Biden, if you can believe that. And Joe Biden was losing, so she's losing even more, and they're having a hard time propping up the narrative. In any case, Trump's base is 53% of the electorate. That has grown by at least 10 points. So he's 63% of the electorate has supported 63% of the electorate. Marginally, is it 58, maybe 56? Really 5 points, it's 58. So 63 is a jump. Conservatively, we could say 58%. That's a landslide victory. If it is 63%, it's even more so. So Trump is gonna turn things up now. So we have next week, we have his rally in Madison Square Garden. It's already sold out. it's going to be a blowaway. And you got Carvel trying to equate it to a Nazi rally because the American Nazis in 1939 had a rally in Madison Square Garden 50-something years ago. So 80 years ago, 75 years ago. How does that equate? It doesn't equate. So Trump's making a play for New York. He's not going to get it, but he might get New Jersey. Just to have a big rally, the kind, he's used to pomp and circumstance, so that's what he's going to close out with. But before this happens, New York Post is reporting Trump books Joe Rogan podcast interview and final election push. Now, my understanding here is that it's booked for Friday. What is it, Wednesday now? So I think that's what the article said, if I wasn't mistaken. They might have moved it to early. I don't think so. I think he wanted it to be on Friday so it could have the weekend talk about. So Kamala Harris apparently also is vying for a spot on Joe Rogan. As Perry and I discussed last night, and Perry said adamantly she will not take it. There is no way Kamala Harris is going to sit in front of an inquisitor for 3 hours. And she may have notes, but she certainly won't have a teleprompter. She'll never do it. I think she's going to claim to do it, and then the last minute, there's going to be some disagreement, and she won't go through with it. I guess it doesn't matter if her poll numbers are so low. How could it hurt, right? Who knows? All right, another big important story here is the Federalist is reporting sister of deceased soldier blasts the Atlantic for latest anti-Trump fabrications. Now, what we have going on here, and I'm going to report it from the Post-Millennial, top officials, sisters of murdered soldier, refute Atlantic hit piece on Trump exploiting my sister's death. I don't appreciate how you're exploiting my sister's death for politics, hurtful and disrespectful to the important changes she made for service members. President Donald Trump did nothing but show respect to my family and Vanessa. In fact, I voted for President Trump today, says the sister. The story goes on to say, on Tuesday, The Atlantic published a piece claiming that during a December 2020 Oval Office meeting, Trump was outraged at the $60,000 cost of a funeral for a murdered Army private, Vanessa Guillen, and issued comments attacking her. Guillen's sister and top officials have refuted The Atlantic's reporting, and I refuted as well. Shortly after her death, The Atlantic reported, Trump invited Guillen's family to the White House. I saw what happened to your daughter, Vanessa, who is a spectacular person and respected and loved everybody, including the military. No, this is what was actually reported. Trump told Guillen's mother, he later said, if I can help you out with a funeral, I'll help you with that. I'll help you out financially. I will help you. And then The Atlantic alleged, according to attendees and to contemporaneous notes of a meeting taken on by a participant, again, bad journalism by The Atlantic, because taken by a participant, she's not attributing the information to anybody in particular, by a participant, an unnamed anonymous source, that an aide responded a bill that was received in the cost of $60,000. It doesn't cost $60,000 to bury a fucking Mexican. The Atlantic quoted Trump as saying, don't pay it. And the article goes on to say, defense official who was present at the meeting discussing the soldier's funeral said, Trump said nothing of the sort. So 2 weeks before the election, Kamala Harris is trailing in all swing states by a significant margin, according to me and others. Don't get complacent, though. So the Atlantic writes a hit piece, as they often do. The Atlantic is a liberal rag of a magazine. They use long, flowery languages, very verbose. And I could never get even when I was liberal, people were pushing me on it. Or I should say when I was a Democrat, people were pushing me on the Atlantic, and I'm like, this is worse than New York Times Magazine. Why would I read this? And it's like too partisan. It's like syrupy, disgusting magazine. But whoa, what a surprise. Kamala trailing in the polls, and all of a sudden the Atlantic puts a hit piece out, a racist hit piece that it doesn't take $60,000 to bury a fucking Mexican. Come on. I don't believe Trump would ever utter those words. And the fact is shabby reporting to use something that is so defamatory from an unnamed source. Now, the Atlantic is supposed to be a news magazine. That's not news. You can't use defamatory statements and then attribute it to anonymous, especially during an election year. That's election interference. What else is election interference? Let's go to another left-wing media outlet. The New York Post is reporting, with Kamala Harris edit, CBS has gone full fake news. GOP, time to boycott CBS. I happen to think Face the Nation is the only decent talking head Sunday show worth watching. I mean, God forbid I will never watch NBC's Meet the Press again. I used to like it with Tim Russert, but since he died or when he left, it went to shit with Chuck Todd, and now it's just as bad because Chuck Todd is still the news director at CBS. So, however, what this opinion piece says, and that's worth noting, is that CBS purposefully edited the Kamala interview to make her look more cogent than she is. That's blatant election interference in a campaign season to take your favorite candidate and make her sound better. Now, we knew they did that. We knew ABC did this. George Stephanopoulos did it with Joe Biden. And so now we have CBS doing it, just to say that the College of Corporations are all working together, the corporate media, to push their favorite candidate. Now, the article goes on to say, and I'm going to try to go through this quickly. First, CBS monitors broke with their own pledge not to fact check during a vice presidential debate, deliberately targeting GOP candidate J.D. Vance and doing so dishonestly, and they were wrong. Then it came to the internal meltdown of historical staff meetings at CBS Mornings, where Tony Dopiquel dared to ask October 7th apologist Ta-Nehisi Coates, challenge her on-air questions about Coates' new anti-Israel book. After that, House Speaker, and this was Face the Nation, Mike Johnson exposed CBS for cutting out a third of his recent Face the Nation interview. Johnson team was smart. They recorded the interview and provided the deceptions for all to see. Also, Face the Nation had close to the entire interview on their YouTube channel, and I posted that on my YouTube channel so you could see the full interview with Mike Johnson on my YouTube channel from Face the Nation. Then the final straw came Sunday when the network finally released a statement about the 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris, stemming from the October 6th release of a teaser that showed her nonsensical answer to a question on Israel. Social media erupted as this typical Harris word salad exercise, but in the actual 60 Minutes interview, they aired a day later. Harris miraculously had a completely different answer. Did CBS perform a selective edit to do crisis control on Harris's behalf? Instead of explaining the discrepancy 2 weeks later on CBS blamed Donald Trump. He had called the interview deceptively edited, to which CBS answered, that is false. Their answer itself is a lie. The interview was edited. But they don't refuse to add any further explanation. Did the network staffers do this on their own accord? Is it in cahoots with the Harris campaign? Was editing done in interest of good journalism? No. Or to make Harris look good? CBS could easily clear up the matter by releasing the interview's full transcript and video. Instead, in responding to a liberal super PAC would, like a liberal super PAC would, they call the coordinated, this calls for a coordinated response. Republicans would be smart to follow up with Johnson's. In any case, they're going on to say, hey, we didn't do anything wrong, but they don't, as journalists would. And what you see over and over and over again is they say things, journalists say things without providing corroborating evidence to bolster their point or their point of view, certainly. They don't do it. Now, there's evidence that it was edited. They should come out and release the whole transcript. But they didn't. It's the same thing with the DOJ interview or the Inspector General interview with Joe Biden. They released the transcript, but then there was appearance that the transcript was edited, so the GOP wanted to see the full taped interview, which they didn't release. So, cover up. So this is on the minds of everybody who's going into the voting box. Axios is reporting Americans split on the idea of putting immigrants into militarized camps. Stop right there, Axios. You didn't put illegal in the headline. That's misleading. You can't put in a headline, Americans split on the idea of putting immigrants into militarized camp. What, any immigrant? Even legal immigrants? Come on. But when they actually show the poll, share who say they support rounding up undocumented immigrants and putting them into militarized camps. And then it has the breakdown. Obviously, Republicans more, independents more than Democrats, white evangelical Protestants more. You know, I don't put much stake in this poll anyway. Moving on, though, to some interesting news from leftist NPR. U.S. intel official says Russia behind attempts to smear Tim Walz. I don't think it was the Russians behind the attempts to smear Tim Walz. I think Tim Walz provided the fodder to smear himself. His close affiliation with the communist Chinese, his lack of gun knowledge, his lack of general knowledge, his strange behavior, his lies about his service record, and of course his lies about being a football coach. Kamala Harris started out calling him coach and then realized that he was an assistant coach with very little football experience. And apparently also very strange interest in being in the locker rooms with the JV team. Some people are speculating. I have no proof of that, but moving on to other news. Barron's multipolar world order forming at BRICS Summit. Putin says an irreversible multipolar world order is being formed. And this is just in contrast to the Anglo-American empire, the Western empire, which, the BRICS nations are fighting against, or rising up against this to form a more multipolar world. But you have to understand, if you look at the alternatives to the SWIFT system, and to undermine the American petrodollar and the world reserve currency, the dollar as such, it's actually being pushed by the West. So the West is fomenting a third world war, and they're drawing up the Axis countries. China, Russia, Brazil, which is now communist, South Africa, could be argued as communist, and India. So rising up against the Western states, and what will happen if there's a third world war? Well, the BRICS is supposed to be an economic alliance, but is becoming more and more of a multilateral reliance, which means they trade in all sorts of different goods. More headlines from the Hill. Cruz Allred in virtual dead heat in Texas Senate race poll finds. What I'd like to say about Ted Cruz is I don't like Ted Cruz personally, but remember, politics isn't about personal. It's not about personality. It's about policy. Now, Perry and I last night talked a great deal about ticket splitting. If you're voting for the GOP, you should vote down ballot as well. This is no time to muck around with people you like or don't like. The political platform for the new Republican Party is where the country needs to go to put it in the right direction in terms of foreign diplomacy, foreign policy, but also domestic policy. And it's all interrelated anyway. The economy, we need to make up for this devastating 20 to 30% inflation that we've encountered over the past 3.5 years. In any case, I don't like Ted Cruz. I don't like him personally, but I like his policies. I like his point of view on the Constitution, his constitutionality, the way he looks at governance, all these different things. I like him as a politician. So if you're in Texas, don't vote for the Democrat. Unfortunately, Texas is becoming more and more blue. So if you're not up on civics, the whole state gets to vote for Senate. So please vote for Ted Cruz if you're in Texas. Hold your nose and do it if you must. More headlines from the New York Post. This is a little close to home for me. Republican Johanna Hayes in Connecticut splurged nearly $13,000 on oysters, Martha's Vineyard trips, and more as residents grappled with historic flooding. Now, Johanna Hayes governs a district in Connecticut north of me. It's a old industrial area, which Danbury, I think, is one of the biggest cities up there, Waterbury, etc., Upper Valley, Connecticut River Valley. So it's a depressed area that she governs over, and that's why, and Danbury and Waterbury have big black populations, so Johanna Hayes is a black woman. And so she cruised to victory, which was disappointing to me. I actually covered her election. But as most Democrats, she looks at as now she's, living the high life. And that's the way Democratic politicians play. Just like Eric Adams in New York City, they think, politics is their road to the big time. And so she's living the big time, even though she's the representative of people from a fairly depressed district of Connecticut. More New York Post headlines. Kamala Harris accused of plagiarism again, this time for fabricating a sex crime and cheating off a former OG's notes. That's where the plagiarism comes from. The fabricating of a sex crime is she made a crime into a sex crime for more publicity. And then as part of her charging document, she just ripped off the very language from a former attorney general's notes. More from the New York Post. Biden on Trump, 14 days before the 2024 election, we got to lock him up. We have to lock him up. We have to lock him up. We got to lock him up, he says. Well, he's the commander-in-chief. And who's locking him up? Just more recent charges from basically the Department of Justice. So the Department of Justice under President Biden is fabricating, in my terms, speculatively fabricating charges against the former president, against what was originally his political opponent, and now is the political opponent running against his party. And the commander-in-chief says we need to lock him up and is whipping the DOJ to go ahead and do so, regardless of the facts. Again, this is election interference. So how many cases of election interference do we need before we say it's not fair? It's not a free and fair election. Reuters says U.S. remains engine of global growth and latest IMF forecast. The reason I put this in here is because this is the leverage of which we use, Donald Trump will use, to get America back on track and get us out of this malaise that we're in, particularly an economic malaise. And we're still dealing with troublesome inflation. New York Times asks, well, are organic foods really more nutritious? Here's how they stack up against their conventional counterparts. So buying organic can be more expensive. Does the higher price tag come with health benefits? So the New York Times is trying to get you to eat more pesticides. There is no difference in nutrition between organic and non-organic food. So that's the misnomer is in the question. The reality is organic foods don't have pesticides. Pesticides fuck up your endocrine disruptor. They're endocrine disruptors. They fuck up your endocrine system, which is your hormones. So if you wonder why people are getting hormone cancer, prostate, or breast cancer, this is the first place to look. The problem is with pesticides is atrazine. It's also in the water supply and whatever is used. Basically, it's a pesticide. It's an herbicide used to kill weeds. And it's sprayed voluminously, if I said that correctly, in huge amounts. Excuse me. Over food, particularly non-organic, GMO food, because the GMO crop is supposed to resist the atrazine, so it kills the weeds and not the crop itself. And so liberally, I should have said, they spray the herbicide on liberally. And so you have to everybody should eat organic. Everybody should drink only spring water. And you should stay away from pharmaceutical drugs as well. You need to be very careful about what you ingest and what you ingest intellectually as well. More from the New York Times, 2 theories of why the polls failed in 2020 and what that means for 2024. To make polling better, you have to figure out what went wrong in the first place. I'll tell you what went wrong in the first place. They skewed the polls. And then when the election happens, people are like, what happened? Why were the polls so wrong? It wasn't the polls that were wrong. It was the polling. The polls were wrong because the way the media interprets the polling and the way they do the polling. It's push polling, which they ask leading questions, and then they call only specific communities. They heavily favor Democrats, and then they use the margin of error to stack the poll the way they want it to look. Goes on to say, pollsters still don't know exactly why the polls underestimated Donald Trump 4 years ago. It's because they didn't want Trump to win, so they made him look like it was losing. And then they could cheat, especially in 2020, they could cheat. So if they make it look close, it's like, oh, Kamala Harris eked out a victory. Good for her. When that's not the case, when she's really down by 6 points, and that's almost insurmountable. Especially if those are in the swing states, and swing states carry the electoral college, etc. So, As a post-election report by professional pollsters put it, identifying conclusively why polls overstated the Democratic-Republican margin relative to the certified vote appears to be impossible with available data. In other words, they won't admit what happened, which is they skewed the poll. Article also goes on to say, non-response bias in which Mr. Trump supporters were less likely to respond to surveys than demographically similar Biden voters. This is true. Trump voters are less likely to respond, but the fact that this is bandied about so often makes it suspect. Now, you mean to say that every Trump voter isn't going to say, it's only certain voters, mostly independent voters, who are voting for Trump that don't want to admit it. And those are far in between. Those are not the majority of Republican voters. There are plenty of proud Trump voters who would likely to say that, but they have to have an excuse for why the polls are so wrong. And the polls are wrong because they want the race to look close when it actually isn't. As I stated earlier in the episode, we're almost at 45 minutes, so try to wrap it up. New York Times again. Abortions have increased even for women in states with rigid bans. Study says a new analysis shows that many women in states with bans are seeking procedures or pills from out-of-state providers, which they can, which I said yesterday. Abortions, the amount of abortions are going up. It's like a sacrament for these people, right? You should practice safe sex. So you should use birth control, but you should also use condoms, etc., to prevent sexually transmitted diseases, etc., etc. But safe sex has fallen out of favor with the, now that AIDS is treatable. But abortions are up. So what the fuck are you worried? Abortions are up even though Roe versus Wade was dismantled. Abortions are up. It says it right here. You could, as I said yesterday, you could still get an abortion. What are you worried about? More mainstream news by the Associated Press. Deadly E. coli outbreak linked to McDonald's Quarter Pounder sickens 49 people in 10 states. It's crazy that this just materializes right after Trump's spectacular media appearance, political campaign appearance at McDonald's, where he donned an apron, no pun intended, and cooked fries, served, packaged fries, and also worked the drive-in window. I thought it was brilliant. And it wasn't brilliant because it's particularly unique. It's pretty much a trite political campaign move. Kamala won't do it because, she doesn't like to get her hands dirty, according to Willie Brown. Associated Press, right-wing influencers hyped anti-Ukraine videos made by a TV producer also funded by Russian media. Oh, boy. So, an investigation by the Associated Press also provides insights into the shadowy and profitable world of political influencers who are not required to disclose who is paying them, raising transparency concerns about their political endorsements in the largely unregulated realm of social media. Well, I can talk about whoever I want, and if I get money from whoever, that's fine. I'm not getting money from anybody, to be honest with you. That's why I still have to work. Come on. Like, the Democratic Party isn't getting funding from the communist Chinese. I don't know. Who cares about what a guy has an online show says? And the way he says it and the information he presents should telegraph who his backers are and what his intent is. Because they originally started this with a thing about this guy Swan, who's got an internet show, and the way he did the documentary about, Ukraine is I'm anti-Ukraine. I don't, I'm anti-Ukraine. I have no love for the Russians, certainly, but I understand foreign policy and the history of foreign policy and NATO's mission and all the things that happened going all the way back to the first Ukrainian orange, the color revolution there, the Orange Revolution in 2017, and then on through the Maidan Revolution there, where in 2007, it was openly admitted that the CIA backed that color revolution in Ukraine. So we knew there that it was the West's idea is to absorb Ukraine into NATO for the purposes of destabilizing Russia. All right. I'm not paid by the Russians to say that. That's just fact. So why don't you ask what NATO's core mission statement is? It should have been disbanded after the fall of the Soviet Union, but whatever. All right, more mainstream media news. The Washington Post, how a conspiracy-fueled group got a foothold in this hurricane-battered town. Veterans on Patrol is an anti-government group steeped in conspiracy theories, and that its leaders a well-documented history of embedded in communities to launch missions related to migrants or purported child sex trafficking, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. The only reason I put this in there is conspiracy. It's a conspiracy group. Patriots on Patrol, they wanted to get involved to help these people. Okay, so they believe the hurricanes were created and steered in their community for the benefit of the establishment. That could very well be. Is there child sex trafficking? Let me tell you something. The United States is the biggest market for illegally trafficked children for sex in the world. As reported even by the New York Times, hundreds, really tens of thousands for sex trafficking have been lost to sex trafficking. Children that have come over the southern border. Tens of thousands. 300,000 children have been unaccounted for. So that tens of thousands number could be significantly higher. This is no joke. It's not a conspiracy theory. The United States is where most of the people that engage in child sex slavery is basically what it is, are in the United States. And so most of that activity is going on in the United States. So the fact that maybe somebody would want to equate that to what I should say is heathens to the heathens in the Democratic Party who don't have a problem with perverse sexual appetites. You can see where I'm going with this. So if they are child sex abusers, predominantly in one part of the other, they're probably in the Democratic Party. All right. Last headline up. The Associated Press, U.S. charges Iran Revolutionary Guard official in alleged plot to kill a human rights activist. That's an Iranian activist. And the only reason I bring this up is because whatever excuse they can make for war with Iran, they're going to do. Thanks for joining me today. Engage the channel, like, subscribe, share the podcast, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment. Get in on the conversation about some of the stories I brought up today. Thanks for joining me today. Remember, you're under attack psychologically and biologically. Join me every day, 10 a.m. on Rumble, live. Check out my other website, libpop.org. Learn about libertarian populism. Stay hip to the trick. And I'll see you tomorrow. Respect.
Are you implying here some kind of conspiracy? You can't handle the truth.
I have rights. I'm an American. I have rights.
Like, everybody needs to be woke.